A unique day in London's financial markets ended with the Chancellor announcing that the pound was being suspended from the ERM and that the second of two dramatic interest rate rises during the day was after all cancelled.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day. Massive speculative flows have continued to disrupt the functioning of the exchange rate mechanism. As chairman of the Council of European Finance Ministers, I have called a meeting of the Monetary Committee in Brussels urgently tonight to consider how stability can be restored to the foreign exchange markets. In the meantime, the government has concluded that Britain's best interests are served by suspending our membership of the exchange rate mechanism. As a result, the second of the two interest rate increases that I sanctioned today will not take place tomorrow, and minimum lending rate will be at 12% until conditions become calmer. I will be reporting to Cabinet, discussing the situation with colleagues tomorrow, and may make further statements then. But until then, I have nothing further to say. Thank you very much.
The most dramatic U-turn in government economic strategy for 25 years was forced on the Prime Minister and Chancellor by the overwhelming pressure of billions upon billions of pounds being sold in the foreign exchange markets. The pound will now be left to find its own level in the markets, inevitably below the ERM floor, which the government was pledged to defend.
Well, the pound is really floating free at the moment, and it doesn't look as though it will be re-established at a new parity until the French referendum is out of the way and until the markets have settled down. So basically the pound is free to go where it wants to go, and at the moment that seems downwards.
Only last Thursday, the Prime Minister reaffirmed in Glasgow the government's absolute rejection of any departure from the 2 Deutschmark 95 parity enshrined in the pound's membership of the ERM.
All my adult life, I've seen British governments driven off their virtuous pursuit of low inflation by market problems or political pressures. I was under no illusions when I took Britain into the exchange rate mechanism. I said at the time that membership was no soft option. The soft option, the devaluer's option, the inflationary option, in my judgment, that would be a betrayal of our future at this moment, and I tell you categorically, that is not the government's policy.
Earlier, in a day of high drama, as the Governor of the Bank of England plied between Whitehall and the City, the Treasury and the Bank of England fired off one after another of their biggest guns in a final effort to live up to the government's pledges to do whatever was necessary to keep the pound in the ERM. First, the Bank of England and other central banks spent several £billion worth of foreign currencies, buying the pounds others wanted to sell. Then the Bank of England raised interest rates 2% to try to persuade speculators to stop selling. When that failed, it raised them another 3%, but still the enemy kept coming. By the end of the day, the pound had fallen several pennies below its supposed ERM floor. The government had to act. Following the Chancellor's statement, the European Community's Monetary Committee meets in Brussels in the next half hour. The committee has power to approve currency realignments within the ERM. The government now has two deeply unappetizing options. It can put its Europe policy first, formalise the devaluation of the pound at a new rate against the Deutschmark, and re-enter the ERM, thus putting the pound back in the possible firing line. Or it can decide that today has proved that Mrs. Thatcher was right after all, that you can't buck the market, and that the pound had better float outside the ERM for the time being. That might hasten recovery from recession, but it would also wreck the government's strategy for zero inflation later this decade. The decision will be fateful.